$2 million. That is the physical mass sitting in front of you. You are 25. This pile of cash smells of old paper, sweat, and the distinct mold of the street. This is not your savings. It is not your profit. It is your liability. You are a market maker for an unregulated shadow financial system, a ghost operating outside the perimeter of compliance. This cash originates from a Chicago narcotics network. It has no wire history, no tax footprint, no legal justification for existing. The dealer watches you. You need to convert this into a sterile asset and return the value to a cartel in Mexico. Amateurs panic. They think of bank deposits, suspicious activity reports, and algorithms. You look at this cash the way a transmission looks at a gear. You pull out a burner running encrypted, self-destructing comms. The world operates on asymmetry. While regulators try to trace serial numbers, you are already making the money fly. You ping your counterparty in Guangzhou. You share a decade of underground ledger trust. He tells you about a Mr. Chen, a legitimate high-net-worth individual facing a strict capital flight limit. Chen urgently needs $2 million in Miami to close on a luxury condo and hedge his geopolitical exposure. Chen wires the equivalent of $2 million in RMB into dozens of shell company accounts controlled by your partner in mainland China. Now, your counterparty holds Chen's liquidity, and you hold the cartel's street cash. 3 days later, Chen's cousin walks into your Chicago storefront. He drops a numeric passphrase. You walk him to the back and hand over the duffel bag stuffed with $2 million in narcotic proceeds. He structures the cash into various regional banks through familial proxy accounts, keeping deposits strictly under the reporting threshold, and eventually wires the aggregate to the Miami escrow. Chen gets his offshore real estate. The dealer liquidates his street paper. $0 crossed a sovereign border. No SWIFT codes triggered. Chen's principal stayed in China. The condo capital stayed in America. The first rule: in this altitude, trust is the only ledger. The money never moved. It just swapped reflections in a global mirror. But the laws of thermodynamics apply in the shadow economy. The books are unbalanced. The Guangzhou broker holds Chen's capital, and you owe the Sinaloa cartel $2 million. You do not use wire transfers. You pivot to the ultimate laundering engine, global trade. You own a legally incorporated appliance export firm in China. The cartel operates a legitimate big-box retail chain in Mexico. The cartel issues a purchase order to your Chinese firm for $10 million worth of refrigerators. But on the commercial invoices, bills of lading, and customs declarations, the cargo is valued at $8 million. The containers cross the Pacific and dock in Manzanillo. Customs inspects the load. The serial numbers match. Tariffs are paid on $8 million. It is a flawless, routine commercial entry backed by legitimate letters of credit. But underneath that steel and plastic, the missing $2 million vanishes across the Pacific. The Guangzhou broker uses Chen's RMB to cover the manufacturing deficit. The cartel retails the units at full margin, washing their narco-cash into legitimate corporate revenue. The second rule: never track the money, track the value. When capital is embedded in steel, plastics, and logistics, regulatory oversight goes blind. You turn 32. Your net worth reaches a number where consumer pricing loses its meaning. You are moving heavier, darker numbers now. A $13 million position. You are no longer just clearing street cash. You are the liquidity provider for global illicit supply chains. A cartel monopolizes the illegal harvest of totoaba swim bladders in the Gulf of California. The Asian shadow market calls it aquatic cocaine. The cartel moves $3 million worth of the product to Asia, while simultaneously sitting on $10 million in US street cash. $13 million total, sitting in your network's liability column. The spread requires deeper hedging. The Asian syndicates buying the wildlife also export precursor chemicals for fentanyl synthesis. Wildlife for precursors, cash for chemicals. It is a three-dimensional ecosystem. You leverage your New York Electronics Import LLC. You issue a $14 million purchase order to an Asian shell. The containers arrive in Newark. The manifest claims Precision Electronics. A physical audit would reveal $1 million worth of obsolete tablets and knockoff watches bought by the pallet. You pay the $14 million invoice. The Asian network takes their cut, absorbing the cost of goods, and the remaining $13 million perfectly zeroes out the wildlife and narcotic deficit. You are 38. The volume requires structural evolution. Trade misinvoicing is no longer enough to absorb the velocity of your capital. You step into the architecture of offshore secrecy. You do not open bank accounts. You engineer entities. You hire a boutique law firm in Panama. They register a holding company in the British Virgin Islands. That BVI company is wholly owned by a discretionary trust in the Seychelles, which is administered by a nominee director in Cyprus. The nominee director is a local dentist who, for a fee of €3,000 a year, signs any corporate resolution you place in front of him. Your name exists nowhere on the public registry. You are the ultimate beneficial owner, the UBO. But legally, you are a ghost. You need to move $50 million for a sanctioned Russian industrialist. The funds are currently frozen in a maze of secondary European banks. You execute a back-to-back loan. Your Seychelles trust deposits $50 million in clean, untainted capital into a private bank in Singapore as collateral. The Singaporean bank, seeing zero risk, issues a $50 million line of credit to the Russians' front company in London. The money is instantly sanitized. It transforms from sanctioned oligarch capital into a pristine corporate loan issued by a highly regulated Tier 1 financial institution. The Russian uses the loan to acquire commercial real estate in Mayfair. If investigators dig, they hit the wall of the Singaporean bank. If they breach that, they hit the Seychelles Trust. If they breach that, they find a Cypriot dentist. The third rule: secrecy is a commodity, and complexity is its delivery mechanism. You turn 43. The physical world is becoming a liability. You transition to decentralized obfuscation, over-the-counter crypto desks. A North Korean state-sponsored hacking collective breaches an exchange and drains $60 million in Ethereum. The blockchain is public. Every intelligence agency on Earth is watching those digital wallets. The hackers cannot cash out through conventional fiat off-ramps. They come to you. You operate an OTC desk out of Dubai. You do not use traditional exchanges. You engage in chain hopping. You take custody of the tainted Ethereum and immediately fracture it across thousands of microtransactions. You execute atomic swaps, converting the Ethereum into privacy coins like Monero, where the ledger hides the sender, receiver, and amount. You push the Monero through decentralized tumbling protocols. The coins are mixed with the liquidity of tens of thousands of other users. The mathematical link between the origin and the destination is permanently severed. You hop back onto the Bitcoin blockchain, taking the funds out in clean, unassociated wallets. You sell the clean Bitcoin to a legitimate hedge fund looking for off-market liquidity, settling the trade in US dollars in a correspondent bank account in Malta. The hackers receive their $60 million, minus your 12% commission, delivered as pallets of US currency in a diplomatic pouch to a Southeast Asian embassy. The fourth rule: the blockchain is immutable, but the bridges between blockchains are dark. You are 48. The money supply is infinite, but the vehicles to store it are finite. You enter the ultimate sterile asset class: high art and freeports. You manage capital for a sovereign wealth fund trying to mask its aggressive foreign acquisitions. You direct their funds to Geneva, to the Freeport, a massive hyper-secure warehouse complex exempt from customs and taxes. You purchase a Picasso for $85 million. The transaction occurs entirely within the Freeport. The painting does not move an inch. It stays in a climate-controlled vault. The only thing that changes is a line of text in a private ledger transferring ownership from one offshore shell company to another. The sovereign wealth fund now holds $85 million of untraceable value. There is no property tax, there is no capital gains tax until it leaves the facility, which it never will. When they need liquidity in London, they simply pledge the painting as collateral to an art lending specialist for a $70 million cash injection. The money enters the global economy as a debt instrument, the cleanest form of capital in existence. The fifth rule: the most valuable things in the world are the things that never see the sun. You are 55. You process transactions across jurisdictions without ever touching physical fiat. You balance deficits in Bogota with surpluses in New York. You manipulate the spread like a shadow central banker. You are isolated. Not lonely, but untranslatable. When the public sees tariffs on the news, you see the cost of clearing illegal cargo rising by 20 basis points. You understand the asymmetry of the world in a way nobody you used to know could process. Law enforcement deploys human intelligence when algorithms fail. Undercover operatives sit in Mexico City cafes, mapping the outer rings of your network. You adapt. You strip your life of data exhaust. You avoid high society networking. You become invisible by being entirely mundane. Your circle shrinks to a handful of peers meeting in private rooms in Geneva. You do not discuss operations. You discuss liquidity constraints, jurisdictional arbitrage, and structural routing. The machine runs on autopilot. It relies on the absolute predictability of human greed. A Tuesday morning, you stand by the glass of your penthouse, looking down at the grid. Somewhere on street level, a 24-year-old in an unmarked hoodie catches a duffel bag thrown from an SUV. Inside is $1,247,000 in street fiat. The ledger resets. It always starts here.